The door slammed against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. "Get her out of my house, now." Kang Minjun's voice didn't rise. It never needed to. 2 security men were already moving, dragging a sobbing woman by the elbow toward the front entrance while she begged, "Please, just give me one more week." He was starting to trust me, and Minjun didn't even look at her. He was looking past her, down the hallway, where a small boy stood frozen in a doorway with his hand pressed flat against the frame, holding himself up. Jai-ho didn't cry. He didn't run. He just watched the woman get dragged away the way he'd watched the last 3 before her, his face a blank wall that gave nothing back. Minjun crossed the room in 4 strides and crouched in front of his son, tattooed knuckles braced against his knees. "Jai-ho-ya, look at me." The boy looked at the floor instead. "I'm trying," Minjun said, quieter now, the kind of quiet that came apart at the edges. "I don't know what else to do." Mary was standing in the open front doorway with her suitcase still in her hand when the woman shoved past her, crying. Nobody had told her to wait. Nobody had told her anything. The agency had said high-profile family, difficult placement, immediate start, and that was all. And now she was standing in a marble foyer watching a man with tattoos crawling up the side of his neck try to coax a silent child off the floor like he was diffusing something that might go off in his hands. "You're late," Minjun said without turning around. "I was told 9. It's 8:56. That got his attention. He stood, and for the first time he actually looked at her, really looked, head to foot, the way men in his line of work looked at anything new that walked into a room they controlled. Whatever he saw, it didn't soften his face. 3 women have quit in 2 months, he said. One of them lasted 4 hours. You have an hour before I decide if you're worth a second one. That's not how this works, Mary said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Nobody talked to him like that in his own house. I'm not applying for a job I can lose in an hour, she said, setting her suitcase down. Either you want help for him or you want someone to perform for you until you find a reason to throw them out too. Which one is this? For a second, nobody in the hallway moved. Even Jai-ho's eyes flicked up. Minjun's jaw worked once, twice. Then low, "Don't waste my time." "I won't waste his," Mary said, and walked past him toward the boy. "Queens, I need you to sit with me in this for a second, because I felt this scene before I ever wrote it down. A woman walking into a house where love has gone cold and rotten at the center, where a child has stopped trusting the sound of his own voice. That's not fiction to a lot of us. Some of you are watching this for the first time tonight, and if that's you, welcome. I mean that. Tell me where you're tuning in from, because this story is about to ask something of all of us, and I want to know who's in the room with me before it does. If you're new here, this is the part where you decide whether you stay for what's coming. I'd subscribe now, Queens, because what happens between this man and this little boy is going to break something open in you, and you don't want to walk in late. The hour came and went. Minjun didn't fire her. He watched instead from the study doorway, arms crossed, while Mary sat on the floor of Jai-ho's room, not in a chair above him, on the floor at his level, and said nothing for almost 20 minutes. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't perform warmth at him the way the others had, all bright voices and forced smiles that made the boy retreat further. She just sat there, doing a puzzle, occasionally sliding a piece toward him without looking up. Jai-ho watched her hands. By the time Minjun walked away, the boy hadn't spoken. But he hadn't left the room either, and that alone was more than the last 3 nannies had managed in a week combined. That night, over a dinner Jai-ho barely touched, Minjun studied Mary across the table like she was a problem he hadn't solved yet. You didn't try to make him talk, he said. He's not broken because he's quiet. People keep treating him like he is. You don't know what he's been through. I know exactly what he's been through, Mary said, and something in her voice made Minjun go still. I read his file. Femur fracture, 2 surgeries, a leg that healed wrong because somebody rushed the rehab to get him walking faster than his body could handle. That's not stubbornness in his leg, Mr. Kang. That's pain nobody's properly addressing. Minjun set his chopsticks down. You're not a doctor. No, I trained as an orthopedic PT before I ever set foot in this country. I know what improperly healed trauma looks like in a growing bone. And I know what fear looks like in a child who's been handed off to 5 different people in 2 months like he's inconvenient. The silence that followed had teeth in it. Careful, Minjun said. I'm not trying to insult you. Mary held his eyes. I'm telling you why your son won't walk right and won't talk at all. Because everyone around him, including you, keeps treating both like they're permanent. He's 7. Nothing about him is permanent yet, unless you all keep telling him it is. Minjun stood so fast his chair scraped back hard against the floor. For a moment, Mary thought she'd miscalculated, thought this was the moment the men from the hallway would be summoned to walk her out too. Instead, he just stood there, breathing, tattooed hands flat on the table, and said nothing at all. Then he walked out of the room. Jai-ho, still in his chair, was looking at Mary for the first time like he was actually seeing her. 3 days later, Mary did something she hadn't been authorized to do. She found Jai-ho in the garden, sitting on the low stone wall where he always sat, never standing longer than he had to, never putting real weight on the bad leg if he could help it, and she crouched in front of him and held out both hands. I'm not going to make you talk, she said, but I need you to stand up for me, just once, just to see something. He stared at her hands like they might be a trick. I used to help people whose legs forgot how to trust them, she said. Your leg isn't broken anymore, Jai-ho. It's scared. That's a different thing. And scared things need somebody patient, not somebody pushing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, he put his hands in hers. He stood, wobbled, held on. She didn't pull him forward, didn't rush him toward a goal. She just stayed exactly where she was and let him find his own balance. Let him feel that nothing bad was going to happen if he trusted his own weight for 4 seconds. 4 seconds became 6. He let go of one of her hands. And that was the exact moment Minjun rounded the hedge and stopped dead. What is this? His voice had dropped into the register that made grown men in his organization go quiet. Who told you could do physical therapy on my son without a doctor in the room? Mary didn't flinch, even as Jai-ho's hand tightened in hers, his whole body curling smaller at the sound of his father's anger. Look at him, Mary said. Look at what he just did before you walked over here and scared him back into himself. Minjun looked, and for the first time, he actually saw it, the boy standing, unsupported except for one hand, the first real weight he'd put through that leg in months without screaming. His face didn't soften. If anything, it got harder, like he didn't know what to do with what he was looking at. If something goes wrong with his leg, then it's on me, Mary said. But something's already gone wrong with him standing still for 2 months while everyone in this house is too afraid to push him an inch. Which risk are you more scared of, Mr. Kang? Because I don't think it's the leg. Jai-ho's eyes went from Mary to his father and back, the way a child watches the air change before a storm. Minjun's hand came up, not to strike, never that, but a gesture of pure frustration, fingers raking back through his hair, and Jai-ho flinched anyway, hard, and stumbled back against the wall, and the moment shattered. Get inside, Minjun said to his son, voice tight. Now. The boy obeyed. Of course he obeyed. He always obeyed his father. That was the only relationship he trusted enough to still function inside of, and Mary watched it happen in real time. Watched the small, hard 1 inch of trust Jai-ho had just extended toward her get yanked back the second his father's temper showed itself. She stood, facing Minjun alone in the garden now. You just undid in 10 seconds what took me 3 days. I won't be questioned about my own son in my own house. Then maybe ask yourself why he flinches at you the same way he flinches at strangers, Mary said, and watched that land like a blade. Queens, I need you with me right here, because we just watched a man almost destroy the only progress his son has made in months. Not because he's cruel, but because he's terrified, and terrified men do damage they don't mean to do. Tell me, are you Team Mary, standing her ground even when it costs her? Or are you sitting with Minjun, a father drowning and lashing out at the only person trying to save his son? I need to know where you land, because this is about to get a lot harder for both of them. Hit that like if you're standing with Mary in that garden. She didn't back down, and neither should you. Minjun didn't speak to Mary for 2 days. He watched, though. From doorways, from the second-floor landing, from the edge of rooms he had no real reason to be standing in. He watched her teach Jaiho to balance on one leg using a kitchen chair as a brace, watched her turn it into something close to a game instead of a chore, watched his son, his silent, shut-down son, almost smile once, the corner of his mouth twitching before he caught himself and smoothed it away like he wasn't allowed. That almost smile undid something in Minjun that 2 months of doctors and specialists hadn't touched. He found her in the kitchen that night after Jaiho was asleep, 2 mugs of tea going cold between them before either of them said anything. "I haven't seen him almost smile since the funeral," Minjun said finally. "Not once." Mary didn't say anything. She'd learned already that he talked more when nobody pushed him to. His mother used to make that face at him, the one before a smile. He's been doing it since he was small. His thumb traced the rim of the mug. "I thought I'd lost it along with her." "You haven't lost him," Mary said carefully. "But he's watching you to know if it's safe to come back. Kids do that. They calibrate off the adult who's supposed to be steady." "I am not steady." It came out flat, almost angry at himself, not her. "I have not been steady since the accident." "I know," Mary said. "I see it every day." He looked up at that, something raw moving behind his eyes, not the Mafia boss, not the man who'd had a woman dragged out of his foyer by the elbow, just a father who hadn't slept properly in months. "Everyone in my world is afraid of me. My own son is afraid of me. Do you understand what that does to a man?" "I think it's killing you," Mary said quietly. "And I think it's the reason he's not talking." Minjun's hand tightened around the mug hard enough that Mary thought it might crack. "Careful," he said again, but there was no real heat in it this time. It sounded more like a man asking someone to stop saying true things out loud. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said. "I'm trying to tell you the same thing about you that I told you about him 3 days ago. You're not broken. You're scared. There's a difference, and only one of those gets fixed by yelling at the people trying to help." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either, and for Kang Minjun, that was its own kind of answer. The threat arrived the way threats always arrived in Minjun's world. Quietly, through a man in a suit at the front gate who said he had a message from H-Wang, and left without waiting for a reply. Minjun read the note twice in his study, jaw tightening with every line. "You took something of his when you took the Western District. He intends to take something back." He didn't say it out loud to anyone. But that night he doubled the guard at the gate, and when Mary passed him in the hallway, he caught her arm, gently, but with an urgency that surprised her. "If anyone unfamiliar comes near my son," he said low, "you get him inside and you lock the door. You don't ask questions. You don't wait for me." "What's going on?" "It doesn't concern you." "It concerns me if it's near him," Mary said, nodding toward Jaiho's room. "So either you tell me what I'm protecting him from, or I'm guessing, and guessing gets people hurt." Minjun's hand was still on her arm. He seemed to realize it at the same moment she did, and let go fast, like he'd touched something hot. "A rival," he said finally. "From before, he believes I took something from him. He's not wrong." A beat. "He doesn't usually go after children, but I don't know that anymore, not for certain." Mary felt something cold settle in her chest, not for herself, for the boy 2 doors down who had just started, barely, to trust the ground under his own feet. "Then we don't let him find out where the weak point is," she said. Minjun looked at her for a long moment. "You could leave. Tonight, I would understand." "You think I came this far to leave the second it got dangerous?" Mary held his gaze. "I told you on day 1, Mr. Kang. I'm not here to perform for you until you find a reason to send me away. I'm here because that boy needs somebody steady, and right now, that's me. So unless you're firing me, I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. Something heavier than that. Something that looked almost like the first real trust he'd extended toward another adult since his wife died. "Then teach him to stand on his own," Minjun said quietly. "Because I think I finally understand why that matters more than I wanted to admit." 2 weeks folded into each other after that. Careful, fragile weeks, where the house held its breath around 2 slow recoveries happening at once. Jai-ho stood longer each day, walked the length of the garden wall with one hand trailing the stone instead of gripping it, started, in small ways, to let Mary in, handing her things without being asked, sitting closer at meals, once even laughing, a small startled sound that made his own eyes go wide like he'd forgotten he could still do that. Minjun changed too, in ways that were harder to see but just as real. He started coming home earlier, started sitting in on the evening exercises instead of watching from doorways, started, once, getting down on the floor beside his son and Mary both, tattooed hands clumsy and unsure with the resistance band Mary had shown him how to use, looking entirely out of his depth in a way none of his enemies would ever have believed possible. "You're doing it wrong," Mary said, fighting a smile. "I am aware," Minjun said, and the dryness in his voice was almost a joke, almost lightness, a sound that hadn't existed in that house in months. Jai-ho watched his father fumble with the band and made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close, close enough that both adults went still and looked at him like he'd done something miraculous. He looked between them, caught, like he'd been seen doing something forbidden. Then, very quietly, he ducked his head into Mary's shoulder, the way he'd never once let himself do with anyone since the accident. Minjun's eyes met Mary's over the top of his son's head, and neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed to be said. The morning, everything changed, started the same as any other. Jai-ho was up early, dressed, waiting by the garden door the way he'd started doing, eager in a way the old Jai-ho, the silent shell of a boy from 2 months ago, had never been eager for anything. "Slow today," Mary told him, helping him out into the cool morning air. "We're not rushing this." He nodded. He'd gotten good at nodding, at small gestures that said what his voice still wouldn't. Minjun came out onto the terrace with his coffee, the way he had most mornings now, watching without watching, pretending to read something on his phone while his entire attention stayed locked on his son's slow progress across the grass. Jai-ho reached the halfway point of the garden, further than he'd ever gone unsupported, and stopped, wobbled. For a second it looked like he might go down, and Mary's hands came up automatically, ready to catch him. He didn't fall. He looked up instead, past Mary, past the garden, straight at his father standing frozen on the terrace with the coffee cup forgotten in his hand, and he took one step, then another, unsupported, unsteady, real. Minjun set the cup down so fast it nearly shattered against the stone, and was moving before he'd even decided to move, crossing the terrace, coming down the steps, closing the distance his son was closing from the other direction, until Jai-ho stumbled the last 2 feet directly into his father's arms. Minjun went down to his knees in the wet grass, not caring, holding his son like he might vanish if he let go, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. Then into his father's shoulder, in a voice rough with disuse, cracked and small and absolutely certain. "Dad, Mary, I love her." Minjun went still. Jai-ho pulled back just enough to look at his father's face, repeating it like he needed his father to understand, needed someone to finally hear it after months of silence. "I love her, Dad." She didn't leave. Minjun's throat worked. His eyes, the eyes that hadn't shown weakness in front of his own men in 15 years, were wet, and he didn't try to hide it, not from his son, not from Mary standing a few feet away with her hand pressed against her mouth. "I know," Minjun said, voice breaking on the words. "I know, Jai-hoya, I do too." He looked up at Mary then, over his son's shoulder, and whatever was in his face in that moment had nothing left of the man who dragged a stranger out of his foyer by the elbow 2 months earlier. It was just a father, undone, grateful in a way that had no language for it. Mary didn't move closer. She stood where she was, tears on her own face now, watching a boy who hadn't spoken in 2 months hold onto his father in broad daylight and say the truest thing either of them had heard in a long time. It should have been the end of the scene, the good part, the part that closes warm. But over Minjun's shoulder, past the garden wall, a car Mary didn't recognize had pulled up at the edge of the property and stopped there, engine idling, going nowhere, like it was simply waiting to be noticed. Queens, I am sitting with you in this one, because I don't think any of us were ready for that boy's voice to come back the way it did, for him to choose her name, in front of his own father, like it was the safest word he had. If you've ever loved a child who wasn't biologically yours and felt it land in your chest like that, tell me. I need to hear it in the comments, because that boy just told us everything we needed to know about what real safety does to a wounded heart. But queens, don't get too comfortable in that garden with them. Something pulled up outside that gate, and it didn't come to watch a family heal. Subscribe if you want to be here the moment we find out who's in that car, because what Mary just walked into, by choosing to stay, is bigger than any of them know yet. And if this story has done something to you tonight, send it to a woman who needed to be reminded that staying, when it's hard, when it's scary, is sometimes the most powerful thing love can do. I'll see you in the next one, queens. We're not done.